She was told, in writing, that she would never board a commercial aircraft again. 11 months later, 29,000 feet over open ocean, with one engine dead and the second one dying, 219 people were still breathing because the woman in seat 31C wasn't supposed to be on that plane at all. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Maya Reyes had written termination recommendations herself, twice, over 14 years, she knew what a fair one read like. This wasn't one. Effective immediately, your certification as a federal air marshal is revoked. Per the attached determination, you are placed on the department's restricted travel list. This designation is permanent. 14 years. 0 disciplinary marks. The meeting before the letter lasted 6 minutes. The scanner at Gate 9 had a documented fault, she told her supervisor, a man named Halverson, who wouldn't hold her eyes for more than a second at a time. I flagged it in March. Again in June. That's a maintenance failure, not mine. The weapon got through under your team's watch. That's what's going in the file. Whose signature approved skipping the repair? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She already suspected the answer had a last name that made people in that building careful in a way that had nothing to do with rules. Don't fight this, he said, almost kindly, like that made it a mercy. It'll look worse if you do. She didn't fight it the way he meant. What she did instead was quieter, and much harder to undo, and 11 months later, it would be the only reason 219 people walked off an aircraft alive instead of not walking off it at all. The passport said Lily Chen. The photo was close enough. Airport verification is not, in practice, as rigorous as people assume, and Maya had spent 14 years learning exactly where its blind spots were. She flew quietly for 11 months. She broke federal law every time she boarded. She told herself, every single time, that this flight would be the last one. Coastal Air Flight 812. Toronto to Manchester. 206 passengers, 13 crew. 219 souls, the way the manifest counts it, a number nobody on board would think about until it became the only number that mattered. Cruise altitude, 3 hours in. Cabin lights dimmed for the overnight leg. Maya had a paperback open on her lap that she hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes, because some part of her, the part that 14 years of training had never actually let go of, didn't like the sound the left engine had been making for the last 10. She was right to not like it. The shudder wasn't loud. That was the wrong part. It came through the floor before it came through the air, a heavy, wrong vibration, and then the specific silence of an engine that has simply stopped contributing. The seatbelt sign chimed. Then chimed again, faster, the way it does when a flight deck's hands are moving quicker than their voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've lost an engine and are beginning a controlled descent as a precaution. The floor angle did not match the word precaution. Maya had flown enough real emergencies to know the difference between a scheduled descent and an aircraft trying to find its own new equilibrium after losing a third of its thrust. This was the second one. Oxygen masks dropped 2 rows ahead of her before the announcement finished. Then the second engine surged, a wrong, guttural sound, power spiking and dropping in a stutter that had no business happening to 2 independent systems within 90 seconds of each other, and Maya understood, with the flat, cold clarity she hadn't felt in 11 months, that this was not a single failure. This was a fuel problem. Contaminated fuel, most likely, loaded at Toronto, working its way through both engines feed lines at slightly different rates, which meant the second engine wasn't going to hold either. Which meant, in the next several minutes, this aircraft was going to be a 219-ton glider over the North Atlantic in the dark, and the only real questions left were how gently and where. She did not think about the letter, or the passport in her bag, or 11 months of rules about staying invisible. She thought the way she'd been trained to think, what does this cabin need in the next 60 seconds, and whose position to give it? A child 2 rows up was screaming, not pain, the specific animal terror of watching a parent's hands shake too hard to seat an oxygen mask. Maya was out of her seatbelt and beside them before she'd decided to move. Hers first, she said, quiet, flat. Yours after. She's watching you. Show her calm and she copies it. It worked. Fear is contagious, but so is the absence of it, if the person offering it sounds certain enough. 3 rows back, an older man's mask hung loose against his chest instead of over his face, his lips already the wrong color, not fear this time, a cardiac history colliding with panic-driven hyperventilation, a second emergency stacking on top of the first the way real emergencies actually do, without waiting politely for the first one to finish. Crew member, row 28, now, Maya called, projecting without shouting. A flight attendant arrived in 4 seconds, good instincts, badly overmatched by what was happening. Mask seated properly. 4 counts in, 6 out loud, don't let him do it silently. He is not having the heart attack yet. He will be in 90 seconds if nobody does this. The second engine surged again and this time didn't recover the same amount. The aircraft yawed, hard, the kind of motion that turns a cabin's low murmur into something closer to a single collective intake of breath. Somewhere behind Maya, the senior flight attendant, a compact woman named Odette, 22 years at the airline, was already moving down the aisle with the particular stillness of someone whose training has just switched on. She stopped at row 31 mid-stride. "You've done this before," she said. "Not a question." "A long time ago." "Then I need you to come with me. Now. Because whatever's happening up front, the captain just requested medical or security personnel identify themselves, and you're the only person on this aircraft who's moved like you know what you're doing." By the time Maya reached the forward galley, the second engine had flamed out entirely. Captain Whitfield's voice, when Odette patched Maya through on the interphone, was steady in the specific, deliberate way pilots are trained to sound steady even when they are not, a controlled voice stretched thin over something underneath it that wasn't controlled at all. "Who am I talking to?" "Someone with air marshal training. 14 years. I'm not currently certified, and I need you to not ask me why, because right now it doesn't matter and in about 4 minutes it might save your aircraft." A half-second pause. Then, "I'm listening." "Both engines out means you're gliding. You know your numbers better than I do, best glide speed, the distance you can cover, whether Shannon's in range. What I know that you might not is the fuel. If this is contamination, loaded at Toronto, it's going to have hit unevenly, which means there's a real chance the second engine isn't fully dead, it may have flamed out on a fuel starvation cycle, not a mechanical failure. If you attempt a relight sequence on that engine specifically, not the first one, you may get partial thrust back. Not full power. Enough to change your glide math. That's not standard procedure for a dual flameout. No. It's not. But dual flameouts from contaminated fuel aren't standard either, and your checklist was written for standard. The pause this time was longer. Whitfield had 17 years and 11,000 hours, and every one of them was telling him that the woman on the other end of this interphone line had no business knowing what she knew, and every one of them was also telling him he didn't have time to find out why before he needed the information anyway. "Relight attempt, engine 2, he said, to his first officer, not to Maya. "Do it." The cabin didn't feel it happen the way passengers feel an engine light, it felt it as a change in the angle of the floor, a small, specific mercy, 3 or 4 degrees of nose-up that meant the difference between a glide slope aimed at Black Ocean and one aimed at a runway that might, now, actually be reachable. "Partial thrust, engine 2, the first officer's voice came back, tight with something that in a few more minutes would allow itself to be relief. "It's not much. But it's something." Odette briefed the cabin herself, in the flat, practiced voice flight attendants use for the version of an emergency briefing that is not a drill, and Maya moved the aisle one more time, not as Lily Chen, not invisible anymore, not trying to be, checking brace positions, correcting a father whose arms weren't actually protecting his son's head the way he thought they were, telling a woman near the emergency exit, calmly, exactly what her job was going to be in the 90 seconds after. Touchdown if this went the way everyone was hoping it would go. The lights of the Irish coast came into view at an angle no passenger on a normal flight ever sees them at, too low, too fast, the ocean close enough beneath the wing that more than one window seat passenger would remember the color of it for the rest of their life. Partial thrust bought Whitfield exactly what Maya had gambled it would, enough energy to clear the seawall short of the runway threshold instead of landing in the water in front of it. The touchdown was hard enough that the overhead bins that had held through the engine failures gave up 2 full rows worth of luggage on impact, but it was on concrete, and it was upright, and the aircraft came to a stop with all 219 people on board still on the right side of a very thin line. Nobody cheered immediately. That's not actually how it happens. For about 4 full seconds, the cabin was simply, completely silent, the specific silence of 206 passengers and 13 crew all independently arriving at the same realization at the same time. Then somebody started clapping, and then everybody was. Odette found Maya in the aisle, still in her borrowed name, already trying to become unremarkable again out of 11 months of habit. "The captain wants your name," Odette said. "Not for the report yet. He said, and I'm quoting, 'Before this cabin evacuates, I want to know who just told me how to fly a dead airplane.'" Maya looked down the length of the cabin, 219 people, most of them crying, several of them still holding each other's hands from the brace position, none of them aware that the woman who just walked past their row twice was the only reason the number 219 was going to appear in tomorrow's news as a survivor count and not something else. "Tell him," she said, "I used to go by a call sign." The intercom clicked on one more time before the doors opened, and Captain Whitfield's voice, no longer holding the practiced calm of an emergency checklist, came through the cabin speakers cracked at the edges in a way that 11,000 hours of training doesn't teach you to hide. "To the passenger who talked me through that relight, I don't have your real name, and I'm told that's exactly how it needs to stay for right now. But I want this on the record, in front of every soul on this aircraft. 219 people are walking off this airplane tonight because of you. Angel Actual, if that's what you go by, thank you. From all of us." Shannon does not, as a rule, have federal agents waiting at a jet bridge for a diverted flight. But the cockpit voice recorder gets pulled automatically after any dual-engine event, and a junior analyst in the review chain, for years in the Air Marshal program herself, before switching to airline safety compliance, recognized a call sign that wasn't public, wasn't common, and belonged to a training pipeline with a small, specific list of graduates. Maya didn't run. 11 months of invisibility had ended the moment she picked up an interphone, and some part of her had known that the second she did it. "Maya Reyes," she said, before anyone asked. "The passport says something else. That part's on me." The weeks after were not a highlight reel. They were interviews, a tired attorney, and a federal charge for identity fraud that was real, and that Maya didn't try to argue her way out of. She'd broken that law on purpose, more than once, and she wasn't going to stand in a room and pretend otherwise. But records pull in more than one direction. The same review that flagged her call sign also pulled the 18-month-old Gate 9 file, because once an inspector general has a reason to look, they look at everything, and what they found didn't take long. The maintenance ticket had been closed out 9 days before the incident by a technician who turned out to be Halvorson's nephew. The scanner had never actually been fixed. Someone had erased the fault from the record so it would look, on paper, like there'd never been one to miss. Maya hadn't failed anyone. Someone had made sure it would look like she had. The department's offer, when it came, was close to generous by institutional standards: reinstatement, back pay, an expunged record, language acknowledging process deficiencies that never once mentioned Halvorson's name or his nephew's. Maya signed the expungement. She didn't sign the reinstatement. "You spent 14 years inside a system that decided, in 6 minutes, it was cheaper to erase me than fix a scanner," she told her attorney, who looked more surprised by the refusal than the last 2 months of chaos had made her. "I'm not interested in going back inside it so it can feel better about what it did to me. I'll keep flying. I'm just not doing it for them." She flies commercially now, under her own name, with no restriction on the record, clean, finally, in writing. Nobody meets her at the gate. Nobody knows her seat number in advance. 219 people know her only as the woman who talked their captain through a dead airplane, and most of them will never learn her real name at all. She's fine with that. She was never doing it to be known.